glad you did that, because I was going to make a prayer to the Holy Spirit that I don't talk and that he does instead, because I love to talk. See how we all need each other? I can't do that either, and I was going to have a presentation for you, but I haven't made a PowerPoint since college, so I didn't do that either. I'm sorry. So the disclaimer is that I have rewritten this speech a couple of times, because everything I've heard for the last month or two since Anna asked me if I would give my witness was, I gotta put that in my talk. Oh, that's great. Oh, that's good. I should use that. So everything that I've read or heard or seen, I'm like, I gotta work that in. So when I gave this, I tried it out on my husband a couple nights ago, and he was like, it sounds a little academic. The parts that are from the heart are great, but you should scrap the rest and just speak from the heart. I was like, okay. So if it's all over the place and you have one of those fire hydrant moments where you feel like it just all came at you and you didn't get a single drink, I'm so sorry. I promise to sprinkle in some stories, so at least it will be entertaining, and I won't make you cry. So you can put the tissues away. One of the academic pieces, he told me to scrap this, I can't. I'm reading this book with my kids. We started it last semester. It's called Luther Burbank, the Plant Magician. I don't know if you've ever heard of Luther Burbank, but he was a contemporary of Thomas Edison and Henry Ford. He was quite the innovator. But he's known as the Plant Magician because he is pretty much the first person, other than Gregor Mendel with the peas, to ever crossbreed plants for their maximum capacity. And after I was asked to give this talk, I read the chapter about what he did with the cactus, and I figured it was fitting. So do you know how a cactus survives in the desert? It's got this very intricate root system. So not only does it put down roots, and they don't go very deep, but they go very wide, and all the roots have roots. So if you were to look at it, which I could have put in a PowerPoint if I knew how to do that, they soak up the water and store it from far and wide. And the other cool thing about a cactus is that it's about 90% water, and it's got this like intercooling system inside, so it stores all this water. And that's why it's called a succulent. So if you cut it open, it's very moist inside, and it can retain that water for a really long time. And I thought this was a great image for us in the spiritual life, because eventually I'll ramble into prayer, which is what my talk is really about, and that prayer is making those roots and storing up that water for when we're in the desert. So I also think it's really cool that if we were 90% of that living water and just the 10% that makes us us, if we were 90% of God's life and God's grace, God's life in us, and just the cool parts about us, like scarves and boots and fun things we like to do, that we would be really making it in this life that is the desert. So Luther Burbank actually crafted a cactus that was spineless, because he lived in Santa Rosa, California, and they would make alfalfa for the basically sheep and cattle that were there, and they could get about 4 tons per acre for fodder for the animals. And even if they had a really good growing season, it was about 4 tons per acre. And so he was like, well, these cactus are growing really well. Like, could animals just eat cactus? You know, they're out there, they don't need a lot of help. But the problem, of course, was the spines. So over time, he worked to breed a spineless cactus. And at its maximum capacity, he could produce 150 tons per acre of fodder. So I thought, how cool is that, to take something that's otherwise kind of useless, make it really awesome, and then leave it to do what it's supposed to do and have it be forage for so many other animals. So I thought that was another cool image for the desert. But now that I see that half of you are asleep, I know that my husband was right, and I should stop being academic about my talk. So I'll go, that was my first story. I was born on a cold December day in 1982. I am going to start there. I had the good fortune to be born to a Catholic mom who had me baptized within the first month of my life in the church. I also had the fortune of being born to a Reformed Jew turned Baptist dad, so I got dedicated in his church too. Unfortunately, my parents divorced when I was very young, and by the time I was 7, my mom had remarried a wonderful man who I have called Dad my whole life, and he joined the Catholic Church so that we could go to Mass together, which we did regularly. until he got a job in St. Louis, and we moved, and they didn't find a church they liked, so I stopped going to church. Off and on, I had been to Catholic school. I still go to Catholic school after that, but by the time it was time for me to go through confirmation, the parish school where we went to church had closed, and I was going through it with my school in 7th grade, and I was going to wait to be confirmed with my actual parish, but we moved in between that time. So I'd gone through all the prep, and then we moved, and then I didn't get confirmed. That'll play into my story in a little bit. So in high school, I fell in with the K-Life crowd, which I think is kind of like Young Life, if you've heard of it, the Protestant youth group. And it was awesome. They had the songs that really spoke to my soul, and cute boys, and they all went regularly, so I did too. My best friend's mom was a Methodist pastor, so on Easter and Christmas and other Sundays when I spent the night at her house, I went to church with them. But by the time I went off to college, I started to look down on people of faith, mostly because the lives that they were living were incongruous with the life that I wanted to live as a liberated woman out on my own for the first time in my life. College. So my college story is dominated mainly by the fact that I dated a really witty, funny, intellectual, very liberal young man who incidentally today is studying to become a Catholic deacon. Totally different story. But the best part of that relationship was watching him argue politics with my parents when they would come to visit. But anyway, I bought what he said hook, line, and sinker. And his parents had stopped going to church because of the priest scandals in the early 2000s. That didn't really bother me because I wasn't practicing my faith either. But towards the end, he was a year ahead of me, and towards the end of his college, when he was packing up and getting ready to go, I was thinking about what I was going to do. I studied to be a teacher, but I was becoming disenchanted with the idea of being a classroom teacher. And I remember saying to him at one point, I just wish I knew what God wanted me to do. To which he responded, I'm not even sure I believe in God anymore. And that hit me like a ton of bricks, because while I wasn't really practicing my faith, I didn't know exactly what I believed, but I did know that I believed in God. So that time away from him gave me a lot of space to think, and I started asking those big questions. I thought it was problematic that somebody I was going to consider spending the rest of my life with, that he was either having an existential crisis at best or total antipathy, which was worse, and I had a lot of time to think. And the summer after I graduated, I did start work on my master's in education, mainly because I was good at it and I had a scholarship, so I went with that. But in my small college town of Kirksville, Missouri, it emptied out, and I had a lot of time. So I started to do a lot of reading, and I asked questions like, why am I here? And what should I do with my life? All these very deep questions, but I was still in a very worldly way asking those questions. So if I could look back, I would probably laugh at myself and call myself a navel-gazing snowflake, because it just, what is my purpose in life? And the problem with that, it's not bad to ask that question, right? But the problem with that is that when you seek that apart from God, who created you for himself, you're kind of like walking in a tunnel, and there's no real good answer, because apart from God, you can't know your purpose and your existence. So I completed an internship for teaching, and I went back to university for the last summer session, and somehow I ended up with a copy of Rick Warren's Purpose-Driven Life. Yes? Okay. And I read it every day, and I did the questions at the end of each chapter, and it was the closest thing to a devotional life I'd ever had at that point in my life. I should say also that for some reason, this is God's grace, but every night before I went to bed, I would make the sign of the cross and pray the two prayers I remembered from my 7th grade confirmation class, which were the prayer of St. Francis, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace, and the prayer of St. Augustine, breathe into me, Holy Spirit. He must have been listening, because I have no idea why I was still doing that. But that was the extent of my prayer life. I was reading it, and it came to the end of it just about the time that I was going to graduate. And then I decided that I would put God to the test. So, if you know the readings for today, you're not supposed to do that. Don't tempt God. But I did. It went something like this. God, if you want me to stay Catholic, you're going to have to wake me up in time to go to Mass tomorrow. And while I had the due diligence to look up what time Mass was at the only Catholic church in Kirksville, which sadly I had never been to, I thought that I would leave it up to God to wake me and didn't set an alarm. So I said, if you want me to go, I need to be up no later than 8 o'clock. And wouldn't you know that I woke up at 8 o'clock on the dot. Not kidding. So I'm like, this prayer thing is great, except that I'm the one setting the terms, and I tell you what to do and you do it. Way to go, me. So the test continues, and I said, God, if you want me to stay Catholic, then you're going to have to reach out and grab me, Mass. You're going to have to speak to me. And I went to Mass. I fell in line quickly. The priest was, The homily was, I made a sacrilegious communion for not the first time in my life. I'm so sorry. But it didn't reach out and grab me. And so I figured, hey, this is God's permission for me not to be Catholic, because he's not Catholic. So I actually left there feeling really invigorated, and I felt like Dr. Seuss's Oh, the Places You'll Go, because at least I was like, I'm on my way. Like, he's not here, I'm gonna go find him. I'm gonna go track him down. So I started to branch out, and I was checking into the latest, religions and devotional lives. But at least I had given him first dibs, right? That's pretty generous of me. So being as that I had no formation up to that point that was really meaningful, I didn't know what was going on at the Mass, and I didn't know how to pray, I had been unmoved. And so incidentally, when I was reading my Magnificat a few weeks ago, I came across this little nugget from servant of God Adrian von Speer, and I want to just remind you not to test God. He says, to put God to the test means to make him do what we want. We have come before him with the express wish, my will be done. Thank you for praying the Our Father before I started. If we as believers earnestly tried this, we would already have fallen out of faith. For our faith contains our obedience in itself, our willingness to receive the Lord's will. Let us ask God never to let us oppose him with our own will. Rather, may he show us his will in our every prayer, so that in all our requests we may ask him only for what corresponds to his wishes. So that's what I would go back and point to my 20-something-year-old self. Okay, so though I had applied for many jobs, because at this point I decided I didn't want to be a teacher anymore. I applied for a job in San Francisco being a copy editor for Old Navy. I had applied for a job in Australia to be a seasonal fruit picker. I did. I applied for all kinds of jobs. The only one that was anywhere close to that was working for the University of Kansas in the Center for Research on Learning. And wouldn't you know it, that's the one I got. The only person in that town I knew was the guy I dated all through college. So every once in a while I was like, did I make the right choice? I did make the right choice, by the way. But as soon as I got to Lawrence, I started looking into the churches there. And on Sundays, I would hop to the church and go to the Mustard Seed Chapel and pray in the singing and worship band, and that was fun. But it wasn't really fulfilling that need that I was seeking. And then it happened. This is my Damascus Road moment, except I was riding a bicycle. You know that St. Paul necessarily wasn't really riding a horse. That's just the way it's depicted in art. But anyway, I'm riding my bicycle. I go to the Christian bookstore on Massachusetts Street, which is the big... Has anybody ever been to Lawrence, Kansas? Okay. Mass Street, right? Everything happens on Mass Street. I was riding my bike because there was so much construction that you couldn't drive on it. But I rode my bike to the Christian bookstore, and I talked to all the friendly people there. And again, like K-Live, they have cute guys who play in worship bands. So the one Presbyterian guy was like, you should come to my church on Sunday. And I was like, okay, that sounds great. So I leave there, and I'm riding my bike past Silas and Maddie's. They make homemade ice cream. It's delicious. And I'm on the opposite side of the street from Silas and Maddie's, but somebody calls out my name. And I turn, and I don't recognize anybody, so I do a double take. And it's this girl I went to high school with. I haven't seen her since high school. I wasn't really close friends with her. I don't know how she saw me. She would later tell me that she was talking to her friend and looked up, and there I was crossing the street. This is God, people. This is the God moment. So she calls my name. I come over and I talk to her, and I'm so happy because I see someone that I know. And I'm so happy that I'm not alone in this great big town. And she says, a bunch of my friends are getting together tonight. We're having a going away party for some people that are leaving because it's at the end of summer and they're going to graduate. You're welcome to come with us. I'm like, fantastic. So I ride my bike home, I take a shower, and I meet them at the brewery. I would later learn, much later, that all these people were uber Catholic. They all belong to the St. Lawrence Center. God had it in for me. But I sat there with Lauren telling her all about how I was on my search for God and how great that was going to be. And she said, oh, that's great. I've been really involved with the St. Lawrence Center and these sisters who are from Italy, and they do spiritual direction. And they play soccer on Sundays in their lawn. I'm like, I'm not going to be Catholic anymore, but thanks. She's like, well, if you ever change your mind and you want to come to Mass with me, just give me a call. So I said, okay, sure. And I go home. That's a Thursday night. And I keep thinking about this Presbyterian thing I'm supposed to do on Sunday. And I was like, well, maybe I'll just call Lauren. So I called Lauren, and I said, you still going to Mass? She said, sure, I'll come pick you up. So Sunday morning, she comes to pick me up, and I go to Mass with her, and nothing monumental happened. In fact, the only thing that I remember, this is another moment you'll have to forgive me for, I have confessed, is that I refused to pray, Lord, hear our prayer, when they asked for an end to abortion, because I was still very, very liberally minded, okay? So I was in Mass, but what I noticed was that not only these sisters, but all the people around them, all these students who came to the St. Lawrence Center all the time, were doing this of their own will, and were really happy. They were really happy. And I couldn't deny that, and I wanted to be around them, and I wanted what they had. So I started playing soccer with them on Sunday at the sister's house in the lawn, and I started going to their retreats, and I started going to their talks, which were in the basement of the St. Lawrence Center, learning about the faith. And Lauren said, why don't you go to spiritual direction with Sister Elena? She's my spiritual director, she's really great. And I said, okay. So I did. And one of the first things that she asked me was, tell me about your prayer life. I was like, I pray these 2 prayers I learned in 7th grade. That's about it. So, she, for the first time in my life, she taught me how to pray. And that's what I'm gonna lead into in a minute. I'll talk more about actual prayer. But I ended up going through RCIA because she started to answer faithfully the questions that nobody else had really had an answer for. She said, why don't you want to be Catholic anymore? And one of the things I said was, I'm pretty sure Jesus never said not to eat meat on Friday. So that's my formation up until that point. But they taught me the faith, and they lived the faith, and they had passion and excitement and joy and purpose. And those were all the things that I really wanted and that I had been searching for. And I want to make a quick distinction between joy and happiness, which you probably already know. But happiness is fleeting. It can come from somebody giving you a smile or a polite remark, but unfortunately it's just as easy swept away when someone gives you a dirty look or says something unkind. It doesn't last. And that is because it's from the world. It's when we seek a good from the world, not necessarily apart from God, but joy is the lasting peace that comes from God alone. So you can't really have true joy without that. And that's evident if you think of the most joyful person you know, it probably isn't worldly goods that makes them truly joyful and at peace. And in fact, the opposite is true for me, because these sisters and everybody else that I know that has true joy, they can be okay with very little. They can rely on divine providence. They can get through really hard things. And it's because they have that true joy of God, which doesn't depend on the external things going well. So I wanted what they had. I ended up going through RCIA, which I think every adult should have to do if you haven't been to any sort of catechesis since you were in Catholic school, because I learned all the things that I was about to profess. And they had given me a pass. They said, you can just be confirmed if you want. And I said, no, I really would like to learn what's going on here. So I did that, and my heart started to change. Actually, God started to change my heart. Because joy is the side effect of having attained a true good. So it's like the side effect, the happy, coincidence, even though it's not a coincidence, of having attained a true joy. So I was starting to experience that in my own life. So Sister Elena taught me how to pray. When she asked me to come back the next time, she said, "Does this time work for you? 5 o'clock on Monday," or whenever it was. And I said, "Yeah, that's good." She said, "Write it down in your planner, and I'll see you in a week." She said, "In the meantime, you need to do the same thing with God. You need to write it down. You need to commit to it. You need to find a time that works every single day." Because she likened it to if I asked you out for coffee, and I said, "I'll see you there at 2:30 on Sunday," and then I didn't show, we wouldn't be friends for very long. So the first part about prayer that she taught me was you have to make a commitment, and you have to stick to it every day. Start with 5 minutes, work up to 10 or 20 or even 30, but you have to make the commitment and carve out that time, because you and I both know that if you say, "Yeah, I'm going to pray today," and then you just wait for it to happen, it probably won't end up happening because life, right? I also want to point out that two things from my conversion story so far before I go on about prayer. Lauren's approach with me, I'm kind of a bullhead, so as soon as I came back into the faith, I was ready to tell everybody else why they should be Catholic too, and I was going to tell them all the things that they probably should not be doing. And every time I think about that now, and how I was on fire, yes, and that's great. But God will say to me, "Is that what worked for you?" And the answer is no. So her example of evangelization is one of the key things that's important to my story. She's soft-spoken, she is caring and kind and wonderful. I try and carry that with me, rather than scowl at the people or condemn the people or judge the people that aren't in line with my practice of the faith. And two was that importance of prayer and scheduling it. So once you make that time and you commit to it, what are you supposed to do? So Sister Elena and lots of people use these books in conversation with God. Have you ever seen these? Yes, a couple of you. They just take, this one is for Lent and Eastertide. I'm not currently using it right now. But they have like third week of Lent Saturday. And they have the gospel, and then there are 3 main points from some spiritual theologian. And they're great. And this is kind of, I feel like, what she gave me as baby food for meditation. She's like, "This will be good. You read this 15 minutes a day and think about it. And then write some stuff down." Actually, that's not what she said. I'm going to give you the handout at the end. There's a very specific process. But that prayer has to be every day, and we make the commitment. Because, as Father Jacques Philippe says, when we take time for personal prayer, and this is absolutely indispensable, especially today, it's not time spent talking a lot, doing a lot, thinking a lot, but truly time given to welcoming God's presence in faith and love. The most deep and fruitful prayer is the prayer of pure receptivity. So above all, it doesn't really matter what you do with that time. If you, at the end of it, if you feel like you didn't get anything out of that time of prayer, it's not necessarily about what you need to get out of it. It's about God having a chance to commune with you without all the other stuff that goes on. Saint Therese also talks about this. She calls it the loving glance, because she says the most important thing in our life is to let God look upon us. So it's not so much about what we have to commit to doing for God. It's giving him a chance to look at us. And maybe he imparts that grace deep down, and you don't really know what that time of prayer, what the fruit of that will be, and you may never know, but it's not about that. So if you're somebody like me who's very task-oriented, then sometimes this is a difficult challenge, but it is, again, like in the gospel, it is one of the temptations that Satan gives to us. Like, you got so much other stuff to do, and you're really busy, and that stuff's all good too. You need to do that instead, and that's a temptation. So letting God look upon us. So in meditation, you carve a disclaimer. Meditation, not like the New Agey kind, the kind that's been practiced by the Church Fathers for hundreds and hundreds of years, where you take something from Scripture, or a work of a saint. It doesn't really matter what you read, just find something good by a reputable saint, good friend of yours who says, here's what I'm reading, the scriptures for the day, the Magnificat, which is what I use every morning. But pray a prayer to the Holy Spirit, that God will let you know what it is that he wants you to take out for that day, that little nugget. And then you read. And the minute you come to something that strikes you, and it may be 3 pages in, and it may be the first 2 words, you stop. And you kind of stew on that for a while. So that part is reflect. God, what are you trying to say to me here? What is it that you want me to take out of this? Is this like my life in that? So that goes into the next part, which is relate. So we've got read, reflect, relate. I'm going to give you this on a handout too. But to relate, because in that moment, Christ is speaking to you, to your soul. He's trying to offer something to you. So you relate in that moment, and you let him do some of the talking, which is really hard for me sometimes. But prayer is relationship with God, and it's not just about us talking. We have to listen. And at the end of it, perhaps the most important part is to make a resolution. So the last R is resolve. Because if you don't make a resolution to carry out into your day-to-day life, then it's just a good exercise. You get some great spiritual reading, and that's awesome. But you don't actually give yourself a chance to grow in virtue. So you take a resolution from your morning prayer, and then throughout the day, check in with yourself. I'll give you some examples of my resolutions, even if they're goofy. But something that you can do concretely that you're accountable for in that day. And so at noon, when my Angelus alarm goes off, I also think, did I remember to blank today? How am I doing on that so far? Kind of renew my commitment. At 3 o'clock, when I like to pray the chaplet, I think, am I still practicing that resolution that I said I would this morning? And when I get into bed at night and I do my examination of conscience, how did you do on that resolution? Are you still keeping up with that? You did a really bad job? Okay. And then you apologize, say your act of contrition, and go to bed. Which is also the examination of conscience is wonderful because I heard this from someone else. If you ever go to confession and you get spiritual amnesia, or you stand in line, you're like, I don't really think I've sinned. No, I can't remember anything I've done. An examination of conscience is really great for that, because at the end of every day, you're like, well, my resolution today was to thank God for my healthy child who spilled his milk 3 times in the same meal instead of being impatient, and I didn't do that very well, and I'm sorry. Tomorrow, I'm going to redouble my efforts. I don't keep the same resolution. So oftentimes, that resolution carries into the next day as what I'm going to make for the next, from my examination into being my resolution for the following day. How much time do I have here? Okay. The first thing is in the morning, make your morning offering. I make a morning offering because I heard this from somebody else, that all day long you've got all these little things you're doing, and there are a bunch of zeros if you don't do them for God. So making a morning offering where you say, I do all of this for you, Jesus, through the Immaculate Heart of Mary, is like putting a 1 in front of all the zeros. So make your morning offering, because then everything you do all day long, you're adding that up for God's glory. Then I take the Rosary podcast with me. I'm going to give you a handout too. If you haven't heard of the School of Faith, they do a daily Rosary podcast. And this is the same guy that had been teaching classes in the church basement at St. Lawrence. He's now Dr. Mike Schurslick, and he runs the School of Faith in the Kansas City Archdiocese. And the Archbishop there, who is awesome, has charged him with catechizing all the Catholic school teachers, all the Catholic school, all the Catholic catechists, and he's rock solid. He's very awesome. But his rosary meditation is what I do first thing in the morning when I walk the dog around the block. And when I get back to my house, I jot down in my prayer journal some nugget that I got from that, and if I didn't, it was just good. If I've already got my resolution from what he said, like last week, it was in the face of when you're impatient, just smile instead of whatever you're about to do. So when my kid spills his milk because he's 3 and he does that a lot, instead of like, just did that, we're supposed to be leaving, get your shoes on, go to the bathroom and get your coat, I said, And it hurts. It's so hard sometimes. But I had a concrete resolution, and I knew that in that moment, God was asking me to be patient and to model for my kid that even when things didn't go the way I wanted to, that was no cause for me to fly off the handle. So sometimes it's not about what we want for that day, because like I told you, I like to be efficient. It's about what he wants. And so my overall resolution for this Lent is, God, what do you want me to do? Because so often I ask myself, what do you want to do? And I plan out my day. I'm supposed to do that. I need to have a plan. I need to know where my kids are at all times. I need to know what we're making for lunch. I need to know what's going on in the afternoon so I get people to the appropriate place, right? I have to know. But so often, personally, and I'm sure none of you do this, I get really attached to my own plan. And when things don't go the way that I want, I'm very frustrated. And I'm learning, especially this Lent so far, that what God wants me to do is let go and to say, okay, God, I'll do what you want instead. Because what you have in mind for me right now is ultimately better than the plans that I make up for myself. What matters instead is that he's using my day and my situation, my kid, to help me grow in holiness and virtue. He's helping me to become a saint. And the way to do that, it's 5 simple words, the way to be a saint. You have to want it. And you have to work for it. We were talking in our small group about setting goals, and if your goal is to be the trumpet player in the marching band at Notre Dame, then you gotta practice every day. If your goal is to become a saint, you need to spend time in prayer with God, developing your relationship and becoming more and more like him every single day. So it's not enough to say, yeah, of course I want to be a saint. I want to be holy. Yeah. Because St. John Paul II says that it's not just for religious, right? There's a universal call to holiness. All of you and me, we're all called to be saints. So we have to want it, which means we have to commit to it. All right. I'm going to go back to the academic side of me for just a minute. Part of the grace in the desert and the storing up of all that water, like I said, it comes through prayer that we get that living water. There are 2 scriptures that I always think of when I think about the storing up of water. Psalm 1 says, "Blessed the man who delights in the law of the Lord and meditates on his law day and night. He is like a tree planted near running water that yields its fruit in due season and whose leaves never fade. Whatever he does prospers." The second one is the Canticle of Jeremiah, which is found in Jeremiah chapter 17. "Blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord, whose hope is the Lord. He is like a tree planted beside the waters that stretches out its roots to the stream. It fears not the heat when it comes. Its leaves stay green. In the year of drought, it shows no distress, but still bears fruit." How beautiful for us. Whether it's a cactus or a rose growing out of a pile of ashes, you have to have those roots and be connected to the source of divine life. Another cool fact about the cactus, he cut off a slab of it and he left it in a closet for 12 months under a stack of papers. And he had bred it to be so hardy that after 12 months with no light and no food and no water, he planted it in the ground, and within 3 days, it sprouted. So I need to be like the slab of cactus, right? Retain the water so that you can be fruitful for yourself and for others. So some final thoughts for you to fertilize this soil of your soul so that you can develop a good root system. Can you tell I was a teacher? Pray the rosary every day. I don't have to talk much about that because Anna did a great job. But Our Lady is always at the ready with abundant graces for us. She is the first and perfect disciple, so turn to her. Please check out the Rosary podcast. He always does a meditation sort of in the style of St. Dominic, where they don't do the traditional mysteries, but he'll offer a teaching, and then the decade is time for you to meditate on that. It's awesome. So there's a handout with the Rosary podcast. Receive the sacraments often. Try to get to daily Mass and go to confession a minimum of once a month. We have confession today. That's awesome. I try to go every 2 weeks, but I make sure that it's at least once a month. Ask your guardian angel to help you and the saints. Because I'm a revert to the church, I missed a lot of that good stuff. I heard Dr. Mike Schurslick say, and I'll just tell his story, but he said, God's up there with the guardian angels, and he's like, look at Schurslick, he's pathetic, but he's really trying. Which one of you guys go down there and help him out? And I'm like, that really spoke to me that day, so my resolution was ask your guardian angel for help, right? That's something specific. But we have a guardian angel, each and every one of us, so utilize them. They're just waiting. And the saints. The saints offer so many examples of remaining faithful, both in good times, but especially in the bad. Read good spiritual books, listen to podcasts, watch the videos, whatever it is, there's so much to learn about our faith. You can never stop learning about our faith. And then surround yourself with like-minded people who are also striving for holiness. Talk about your prayer life, your struggles, and your successes. St. Paul tells us that we're running a race. So we're all in the race together trying to cross the finish line, which is heaven. But don't forget to stop at the water stop every once in a while and take a drink. Catch up with your friends. That's what we're doing right here. We're filling up at the oasis in the desert, right? To store up that water. So, all right, in closing, take heart that prayer and this relationship with God should not feel like just another item on our checklist. Though it's hard and it takes a lot of work, Father Jacques Philippe says, to be Christian is not above all about fulfilling a task, a list of things to do. It is about welcoming, through faith, the immense gift offered freely to us. To live the gospel means learning to receive in our human heart, with its limits and weaknesses, all the richness of the Father's merciful love, letting ourselves be transformed by it day after day, responding freely and generously to it, and sharing it with those whom the Lord places on our path. So I know I have like 2 minutes left, and I'm going to tell one more story, because I promised I would tell you a story at the end. And if you know my children, I'm not going to name names, but you'll figure out who I'm talking about. So Valentine's Day 2 years ago, I put all their little candies and their booths up at the counter, and my 3 oldest come down. The first one comes down, immediately scarfs down all the chocolate and the Skittles. This is before breakfast, and darts out of the kitchen to go watch a show until everybody else is awake, because it's early. By the way, I'm in my prayer time, because I didn't get that out of the way before they came down. So that one runs away. The second one comes down, sees what's on the counter, and carefully calculates when they're going to eat this one and save the Skittles, and then maybe have the Reese's Peanut Butter Cup after lunch, and that should get them through the rest of the day. Very methodical. Also goes away to watch the shows. The last one comes down, sees the stuff on the counter, and comes to plop into my lap. Arms around my neck. Happy Valentine's Day, Mom. I love you. And I melted. So when this one gets up, and I said, did you see your stuff on the counter? That's awesome, thank you so much. And leaves to go watch the show. So I go back to my prayer, and at first I was a little bit disappointed. I'm like, well, so there's that proverbial child, they can't all be grateful. There's the one that's so methodical. There's the one that scarfed it and ran. And then there's this one, you have to just love this one who just wanted to love you. And I heard God say, which one are you? I'm not that one at the end, but I'm trying to be. And my point is that if you have a heart full of gratitude to God, like that litany of thanksgiving that Anna was talking about, that attracts grace upon grace. If we can live in gratitude, even though things didn't go the way that we meant for them to, and things don't always turn out the way we want. In that Rosary podcast, he always says to accept the things that you did not ask for, do not like, and cannot change, and to endure them with love and offer them back to God. That this is the path to holiness. Thank you very much, and God bless you on your Lenten journey.